People of the internet, welcome to Atheist Edge. I am your host, Kaz, and today I am joined by Shwah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now, yeah.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Pretty good.
Hey, so that was a quote that was from Jimmy Brooks, one of the fans of Atheist Edge, and he sent it to me via Facebook, so I thought I'd pop it up there at the beginning of the show just to show some love and appreciate you reaching out to me, Jimmy. So thank you very much. And anybody else who has anything you want to put on the show, if you want to have a article you want me to cover in the future, if you have a meme you want to put on Atheist Edge Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, just send it on over, and if we like it, we'll send it. If not, I'm sorry. It's not just me. Jim is still involved in that too sometimes, so he sends he edits that and sends them out sometimes, and so it is what it is. But I do appreciate you guys so much. Jim is still a partial owner of Atheist Edge, just so you guys know. I don't know if we ever did clarify that, but yeah, it's not just me entirely. But yeah, so Shwah, we're gonna talk about you and your dang theism.
Yeah. I consider it I think that quote's kind of interesting. I feel like the way it tries to progress it tries to treat all religions rather equally. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to go about it. I was sort of wondering what a justification for that would be. My justification would be sort of that, what Zeus could offer theologically, ethically, ontologically. It's missing something, and I think throughout the religion it needed to develop more continually. And I'm not sure. There's a romanticist who tried to say that. I forgot what it's called. I forgot what the era is called, but it's that there's a time period when all these religions started up, and for the Greeks and for the Western, which was the basis, would be philosophy, which is non-theistic. And I thought that's kind of interesting. But you see that Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and all this kind of stuff, they started all around there, and inside China just as well. But yeah, with religion, we see this development from animism towards, or burial cults to animism, towards polytheism and full paganism, and then all the way up to monotheism. So I think there's a argument to make that Christianity, it can prevent or get rid of slavery, or other things that happen, like being against Hitler and stuff like that, where paganism may not be able to do that. So, and you see that you kind of see the neo-pagan. I don't know if I believe neo-pagan is paganism, but you see a lot of the neo-pagans were very much for the folkish movements of the Nazis, but Christians were like, you're doing the wrong thing, and not just because you're killing Jews, because you're doing the wrong thing. And so you had the Jehovah's Witnesses and a lot of Christians like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I think I just read today, and you had a lot of people who were against it based on ethical grounds through Christ.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Shwah. I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention that this is the first time I've ever tried this, but I'm actually streaming live on Facebook for the first time. So if anybody's watching on Facebook, welcome and thank you for joining us. So can you just go back up a little bit and give me again what you said about the paganism versus Christianity is in terms of the morals?
Sure, yeah. So in paganism, you have like obviously like Zeus and all of them. They do a lot of thieving and stuff like that. And then like time is a bit separate. I don't know what the sisters are. I haven't studied the paganism all that well, or the Greek one, or any of them. But we've all got the grasp on just growing up in the West, how they operate, and you could see the morals that they promote. If you look inside Rome, like the women, they would carry a book of Plato around, and it's because they believed that he promoted women's rights, and so they liked that about him. And so I don't think you can get women's rights out of paganism in that sense, or if it did, I just don't see where it would come from. It would take a lot of
certainly not that paganism, right?
From which one?
certainly not that paganism, at least not
Yeah,
ancient Greek mythology paganism.
yeah, that's very fair. Yeah. There may be other ones, but I feel like how is it like the early religions, they were very animistic and they were a lot more equal. I think we all know that the tribes of like Native Americans or whatever, they were a lot more equal, but eventually they all leaned, and then like the Bronze Age, and then when the Bronze Age collapse happened, you start seeing less women gods or female gods and stuff like that, and you start seeing more male ones, and that's because there's something more fundamental that was being pushed for. And I don't know exactly what it was, or maybe if it's just how they interpreted it or something like that, but they did lean a lot away from like the more sexual aspects that they had, and a lot more towards like this hierarchy or something like that. And I don't know if that can be properly delineated as male and female, or if that's just what they think, or that's just how they interpreted it. But in any case, but yeah, I do think a more developed paganism does lead away towards women's rights, and I do think Christianity supersedes and fulfills a lot of that women's rights and all that kind of stuff.
We have to understand, from my perspective, Christianity is a more developed paganism. It's just that they inadequacies of Thor and Zeus and etc., and they said, okay, well, let's rewrite the book and make something a little bit better, and now we have what we have now. It's not perfect by any means, because it was still written by men, and you see what we have now today, an imperfect world, because we are governed by people who believe in imperfect and made up gods. But
Sure.
I'll leave it to you to interact with that.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah. I'll say that it really does depend on your relationship with Christ, particularly in the Christian viewpoint. I don't know how much that would work inside paganism. Um, but inside like a lot of the morals that a lot of like the pagans, or like anybody, even like liberals and stuff, they get a lot of the concepts specifically from Christianity. If you look at early abolitionism, but if you look at early women's rights and stuff like that in America, those were all Christian based. Like there were Quakers, but there were other religions, other denominations too. But these were very much based inside Christianity. These were not part of liberalism whatsoever. There were some attempts at liberalism at the start to like get rid of slavery or do this or do that. But if you see like the early parts of it, it's people who either have an extremely Christian background, like John Adams. He wrote into, I think, Pennsylvania to get rid of slavery and stuff like that. He was raised by Puritans and stuff like that. And so you find this huge Christian aspect, in which case all these moral developments, which everybody says are good. And I don't think it's really too hard. Like legally, individualism, the way our Constitution is run, they've adopted these concepts and stuff like that. But they didn't come from liberalism itself. In fact, they were saying, well, freedom to sell, freedom to, be an economic unit. That's the basis that promotes peace, by what they're doing now by like limiting trade and stuff like that, and then tying people's economies together so they're international, and then being like, okay, well, that's a bad thing, you shouldn't do that. But so they tried to promote into that. But if you look at the first ethical basis of these things, it's all Christian.
Well, I mean, there's certainly an ethical basis for slavery in Christianity, but
There's not.
I'm not going to take it so far as to say that slavery is unencumbered in Christianity. I won't say that, but it is certainly permitted and condoned within a certain structure if you follow the letter of the Bible.
Yeah, so Christians, we don't follow the law. We follow the, how do you call it? We follow faith. Faith. So we don't follow that. So usually when people say that, they bring up like Leviticus or Exodus or something like that, and they're like, "Oh, well, they allowed it." And it's just like, yeah, we don't follow them. We don't do that kind of stuff. Christ fulfilled all that stuff. So you'll find like verses for Paul, and he specifically says. And people do try to bring up Paul and be like, oh, well, Paul was like saying like, well, go be back to your master. Don't do that. And the point of that isn't to say we're promoting slavery, or he's promoting slavery, anything of like that. He eventually says later in another thing, if you're in slavery, if you're not in slavery, you're still part of Christ or whatever. If you can get out of slavery, then do get out of slavery. But the point is to be good. And so if you're a slave and you get sent back to that, then that's just saying be good, do good. So we get freedom not from war, We don't get freedom from anything. We just do freedom from doing good. Romans 13:3. And I have another verse too, which says there's no law against being peaceful, trusting, kind, and loving, and all that stuff. So that's the whole point. You could break slavery by doing that.
I'm sorry, you're saying that there's a Bible verse that says if you're a slave and you can get free.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 7:21, right? Is that what you're talking about?
That should be it. Yeah, it should be 1 Corinthians.
Art thou a servant when called? Be not concerned. But if thou mayest be free, then make use of it.
Yeah. You can check the NIV. It might sound a little weird in the KJV, but yeah, it's the point. We're not anti-slavery, because if we were one single issue anti-slavery, then we can't have the full thing. And so that's a lot.
Okay, but wait. That's beside the point. What I wanted to bring up was Matthew 5:18. For most certainly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not even one smallest letter or one tiny pen stroke shall in any way pass away from the law until all things are accomplished.
What verse is that?
Matthew 5:18. This is a quote from Jesus himself. I don't see how anything Paul or anybody else says can trump that.
I'd have to open it up, but yeah.
This is the whole thing, right? I mean, we should just stop right here. Let's just let you read it. I'll talk about other shit while you do it, because I mean, this is everything, man. I mean, I've been so hung up on this, and I'll just keep ranting while you read it. I'm gonna rant for as long as you take. Okay, I have been hung up on this for so long. So many times I've encountered Christians who say things like, we are not bound by the law of Moses anymore. But this verse has glared in my face since I was a child, that this is the word of Jesus Christ himself, the God man incarnate, telling me that not a single pen stroke, not a small little letter, and I'm just like, okay, so that means, maybe I'm being crazy, maybe I'm the pedantic psycho here, but that to me says that every single little word, I mean, I'm not even paraphrasing. So when Christians come at me like, oh, we can eat shellfish, oh, we can get divorced, oh, we can wear mixed linens, and we can shave our faces and all this other stuff, right? You guys should be walking around looking exactly like the Taliban if you were really following the letter of the law, acting exactly like extremists, like any other religious extremist group, if you were really following the letter of the law. But you're not, and you're defying Jesus. And I just don't understand how you can just say, oh, well, we're by grace. Where does the Bible say grace cuts the law?
Yeah. Well, it says until he fulfills it. And so he's the one who has to fulfill it. He's not here to abolish it. It's not saying that we aren't supposed to follow it. Let me give it an
heaven and earth pass away. Heaven and earth are still here, bro.
Yeah. How is it to say? Because he's not supposed to abolish it. He says later in the Sermon on the Mount, eye for an eye, instead of eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. Instead of doing that, you're supposed to turn the cheek. Now that's the law. Talion's the law. That's inside Exodus and Leviticus. It's the Mosaic law. And so that's one in which he surpasses it. And there's a few others inside there. But that's specifically in the Sermon on the Mount just as well. So he's not saying that he's here to abolish the law. The law is still there, but he fulfills it. And so we're well, I guess just stop right now.
I mean, if we want to introduce a concept like abrogation, like the Muslims have, I guess we can talk about that separately. To me, I would just take that as a contradiction. I would say, okay, well, obviously whoever wrote this part of the Bible wasn't talking to the guy who wrote that part of the Bible, and they got their wires crossed, and one of these guys is wrong, and I don't know who, so I'm just going to ignore them both. But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how I'll
Well,
leave it.
I suppose that seems fair, but he talks about what fulfilling is. He doesn't say he says what negating is, but he's not negating it. He says what fulfilling is, and that's the start of the Sermon on the Mount, or that's the middle part of the Sermon on the Mount after the introductions. But yeah, he talks about what fulfilling is, and so when you turn the other cheek, you fulfill eye for an eye. You fulfill all that kind of stuff. And we do better for that because MLK used turn the other cheek. Gandhi through Tolstoy used turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek fulfills all those laws. And so the whole point is we have something that's more fundamental than the older laws or something like that. But he fulfills it. And the whole point of fulfilling is very important because as Melchizedek, the priest inside there, it talks about what the basis of the law is, or what the priesthood is. And then he talks about how he fulfills it and how it's more fundamental. And in that sense, it's kind of like having classical mechanics, and then somebody comes around and it's Christ, and he's like, it's general relativity. So you have something that's more ontologically more fundamental, which explains the classical mechanics. You can use general relativity to explain classical mechanics, but it fulfills, in that sense, you could say it fulfills classical mechanics.
So you're saying that turn the other cheek fulfills eye for an eye.
Yes. It's more successful. It's ontologically more universal. It's more ethically proper.
But it's also a part of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever is necessary for it. Whatever the basis of what eye for an eye is in the Mosaic law is to it's to free the Jews, which were slaves. It was a way to free the slaves. So it's a path. In fact, if you look at the slave Bibles inside there, they heavily abridged they got rid of so much parts about slavery and stuff like that, so that it was a really small Bible, because they didn't want to teach them, because those were instructions to be out of being slaves. But the instructions weren't instructions; they were based in a relationship with God and being and stuff like that. So fundamentally, how we interpret what the Mosaic law is, it's being in order to an ethical basis for people to grow closer to God, to be more free, to be more, et cetera, to be more good, to be more successful. And then you see people fail that and stuff, and then all that kind of stuff happens. But Christ is even more fundamental to that. Christ is the way to God, etc.
Yeah, like Maya, I'm still very foggy about this fulfill thing. So,
sure.
How does if I were to say, let's pick maybe we should just pick another law. Maybe that's the best way to go. I'm not sure. Or maybe we should just stick with it. Let's just stick with it for now. Okay, so eye for an eye and turn the other cheek. Eye for an eye is a harsh. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Yeah.
Turn the other cheek is complete forgiveness, and I mean they're diametrically opposed. I don't see.
They do seem like that. They do seem like that. Yeah.
You're gonna have to explain that to me.
Yeah.
Well, is there another example that maybe will illustrate the parallels? If we could see two of them next to each other, maybe that would help to illustrate what you mean. Is there another fulfillment?
Okay, yeah.
And then we need a negation to see the contrast.
Sure. Well, I suppose let me push a little bit further into this. I'd have to look in the Sermon on the Mount for another one. But
let's just do a negation. Forget another fulfillment. Let's just see a negation.
We
need the contrast.
The negation of not fulfilling
we
it?
see this as a negation.
Yeah.
We see this as a negation. We see this as a contradiction. This is throwing something out and replacing it with something new. And you're saying this isn't throwing something out. This is not out. The old thing isn't out. It's just what? I don't know. I can't I have no adjectives. I'm out.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay, well, let me try and put it this way. Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. That's called lex talionis, which is so we just call it talion. Uh, it's from the Roman use of it, but it was a really old way, and Jews use it in a completely a very distinct way. Um, but in any case, if you view them both instead of justice, their forms of justice, then you can see eye for an eye fulfills justice to some degree. It was used, by Bronze Age and even by Romans. It was more country kind of thing. But if you see them both as justice, then turn the other cheek is way more judicial. So instead, it fulfills everything in a judicial manner. If you just use the actions, then sure, that's not going to really get to but that's not going to get to the core of it, at least not in the theological or Christian sense. So if you view them as that, then yeah, turn the other cheek. It's on the same level. You can view it on the same bit. It's going to have different actions and stuff, of course. But if you look inside Exodus and Leviticus and stuff, how they use talion, they actually, a verse that people like to quote, I think it's, I forgot, it's like Exodus 21 or something like that, or maybe it's 23. It's something where it says, like, if you beat your slave, and he doesn't die, then you can go free. But if he does die, then you get punished and stuff like that. But if you go down a little bit further, it says that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If you break if they lose an eye, it's called a bed, servant and slave. There was no distinction then. It was just you were an indentured servant or whatever, and you got free after Jubilee, which is after 7 years. But in any case, a bed. If you if
Not everybody,
they
though,
were
right?
to which one?
Not everybody.
Oh,
There were
yeah,
exceptions
I
to the
think it's like
Jubilee, right?
yeah, I think it's like the Canaanites or whatever, but they could still be free.
POWs, and also the people who were tricked into staying slaves by the masters who gave them wives and children.
Oh, that's if they wanted to stay with the wives or the children or something
If
like
they were
that. But
coerced and tricked.
I think they could still convert and do that stuff. I don't know too much about that, but
You gotta say that's for the slavery debate discussion, because that's a
sure,
whole thing.
it is. It really is. But in any case, it says if you break your if the prisoner loses an eye, they go free. If they lose a tooth, they go free. And so the whole point of this, of how this is, it's one to make sure that they were free. They didn't want to be whatever. So the whole point of them delineating this is Hebrews will be free. But they still wanted to treat people properly. And so there was some ideas or concepts of how talion was applied, that even if you look at the verse before that where it says if you break the slave's eye, then it goes out, it goes through exactly what full of talion means, and it goes bruise for a bruise, wound for a wound. That's where it ends at. So it is saying it's pretty judicial. It tries to be judicial, at least towards the Hebrews fundamentally, but also towards others as well. So if you view it on a judicial format, then it fulfills it.
Can you remind me, how did we get on? Maybe you don't even know anymore, but how did we get onto this track of the slavery thing?
Oh, we're trying to talk about the word, whether the word was by pin stroke, whether it was supposed to be the same thing, and then before that was um, oh Lord, I don't oh I don't remember. I have no clue. I think it might have been slavery, to be honest. No. Yeah, it was. I don't remember. I think it was like whether we have to follow that, and yeah, I think that was the whole
It's just
topic.
that I feel like even if you feel like the slavery in the Bible was an improvement on the slavery of the time, you can't deny that it could have been better.
Oh yeah, but they did sin. A lot of them sinned. That's just a fact. A lot of them sinned. But outside of that, you have to grow deeper towards God in order to have more fundamental. And so Christ gave us a way which was completely better than that. But yeah, I mean, they did try and keep themselves safe. I think the most fundamental thing to them at that point was to not be enslaved.
I mean, if God had allowed them to eat, or let's take it even easier, right? If God had allowed them to mix their linens, if he had never put a ban on that, of all things, what's the worst that could have happened to the
Yeah.
Israelites?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally what that is, a lot of that's from the Abrahamic aspect. It's about purity. It's about purity to God, and that gets you
Okay,
close to God.
so let's say that he allowed the mixing of linens. That was the one way in which they were impure to God. Every other way they had to be washed, and all the other rules were the same. All the
Yeah,
other purity aspects, but what's the worst that could happen? They would have been corrupted, messed up people. They would have
well,
sinned more. They would have gotten captured by invading forces more often.
yeah. Well, I think we do see a dead end with that. But if you like what it's sort of like what's another sin, like if you're robbing a store, what's stealing the candy bar? Or if you're doing something really serving the poor and stuff, what's giving them some food? At a certain point, those they were highly obsessed with purity. They were highly obsessed. They thought that would get them towards God, and you see that inside Egypt just as well. There was people who were trying to get
Well,
towards God.
yeah, yeah, I get that. That's a human thing, though, right? That's their own them projecting onto God whatever they believe purity is, right? Because if that's such a big deal, the mixing of linens, that God had to put a total ban on it when it had literally no physical appreciable difference in their lives from day to day, but the owning of slaves had a tremendous effect on many people's lives and their children and their children's lives.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but he couldn't be bothered to ban that.
yeah.
That to me is that just it bottles the mind, to quote a comedian.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Right?
Was it
I
Dane Cook
mean,
or something?
I can't remember, but if you just when you juxtapose those two things, it's
I get your
completely
point.
ridiculous.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so how would you say it? So you could sell Hebrew Israelites, they could sell themselves into a bedness. They could do that. And so it was part of the economy that was happening with there. It was part of the it's just what the whole thing was. So it's not really something that they were capable of like building up a bit further. So um yeah, so it's just fundamentally what it was. It wasn't like it was like, oh yeah, we're gonna hurt everybody else or something like that. It's just what everybody was doing, and this was a path outside of it. This was a path towards freedom. So it wasn't something. It was still more judicial. It was more fundamentally ethical. Uh, so that's sort of what everything was working towards. I mean, yeah, that's yeah, but yeah,
I mean, I don't want to get too political, but I think that there are certainly better ways to handle your brother, quote unquote, who falls into debt. Um,
sure,
Better ways of dealing with a sister whose husband dies than forcing her to marry you and bear your children.
sure.
But uh,
No, that's
so
fair.
let's switch gears a little bit, right? I want to kind of go back to the conversation that we were having offline before we started
Sure,
this discussion.
sure, sure,
So I have my notes. I believe you have your notes. And I'm going to defer to you first as my guest. So,
sure.
is there anything that you particularly wanted to get off your chest or get on the record or get into before I go to my side?
Oh, I suppose there's not really anything. Just physicalism. I think it's has issues or whatever, materialism or whatever. I think those have issues. But I'm not sure if you're fundamentally a materialist or physicalist,
Hmm.
or how you account for atheism or your position on
How do I
atheism.
account for it? Okay, so I'm going to give a quick disclaimer for the channel, for myself, real quick to everybody who's listening. So I am obviously not a PhD of any kind. I would have said so. I am a student, an autodidact. I study these things on my own time when I have the time. I love learning about philosophy, but I will use these words incorrectly sometimes, and I apologize for that. And please feel free to correct me in the comments and in the chat. I appreciate being corrected. I appreciate learning. So if I do use a term incorrectly, it's no skin off my nose. I just am going to learn some more. So let that be said. I don't know what Shwah's particular level of expertise is, but I am a bachelor's degree holder in nothing to do with philosophy. So there it is.
I don't wish to give out my credentials.
Okay. So physicalism. I understand it. I like the word materialist. And we talked briefly about the distinction between materialism and physicalism, and we looked it up on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and found that for the most part it is two terms that are used interchangeably, but you had a take that it is there is some distinction there. Can you briefly retouch on that for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So how I've been explained it, how a lot of professors or something, PhDs or whatever, explain it. They say that that physicalism is more about like what physics is and what physics can prove. It's like physical realism, like mathematical realism. Physics encompasses matter and energy, while materialism is just what matter is. But you brought up the point that it was that there's a historical distinction with the Vienna Circle using it for physics, but obviously physics was coming up inside that point, and the Vienna Circle was very against metaphysics and materialism. Has that baggage of being a metaphysical position. So I think they tried to take a more nominalist route towards it, and so they tried to just treat it with physics what it is. And so that's what my view is. But yeah, and then you can have supervenience or reduction into physicalism.
All right. So to add some authority to this little discussion, I'm going to read directly from the SEP. Materialism, as traditionally construed, is not a linguistic thesis. Let me go back a little bit. This is from the Vienna Circle, which is a group of philosophers and scientists and mathematicians in Vienna prior to World War II. Neurath and Karamp understood physicalism in the same way as a group of some of the guys there. I'm not reading directly. Sorry. I'm kind of paraphrasing. Materialism, as traditionally construed, is not a no, still not there yet. One thesis often attributed to them is the linguistic thesis that every statement is synonymous with some physical statement. But materialism, as traditionally construed, is not a linguistic thesis at all. Rather, it is a metaphysical thesis in the sense that it tells us about the nature of the world. Okay.
Sure.
So that's what I wanted to touch on right there.
Sure. Well,
sorry.
Can I ask? I've got a position, but I do want to ask you where you go on it, in case you want to engage with it, because I do have a really good argument against it.
So what's your question first?
What do you think about the? Are you a physicalist or are you materialist? What's your position on that?
As far as I can understand these concepts, I still see them as interchangeable.
Okay, that's fine.
Either
fine.
one.
That doesn't bother me.
Materialist, not a strict materialist, in the sense that I still see emergent things that come from material objects,
Sure.
that are non-material in a non-strict sense, but they are still fundamentally supervened on by the material reality, and they cannot exist without the material reality. I can't think of anything that could exist without material reality. I can't think of anything.
Sure.
Please, I would love to hear about it.
So would you reduce? So you would reduce that into material. You would reduce, not supervenience. Supervenience means it can go before or after it. Reduction means it can only go after it. So like you fundamentally, if you have a thought or something like that, or mathematics, it's after the material things, like the material things ground it. Do you think that?
I think so. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I just had a debate with.
If I understood all the words you just said correctly, then yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I just had a debate with somebody who was he writes for Academy or something, but I don't think he's a professor. But in any case, if uh, if mathematics is solely a language of physics, then what math has changed when you switch from quantum mechanics to like general relativity or even classical mechanics? Nothing changes, right? Because the math is the same. And so we actually use
So
math
hold
to
on, say it one more time. Say it one more time. What
sure.
changes
So
when what?
does math if math is a language of physics, then if we change the physics system, like from quantum mechanics to uh, classical mechanics or general relativity or quantum field theory, string theory, or whatever that nonsense is, if you switch it to those, math should change because it's the language of math, but still 1 + 1 = 2 or whatever calculus is used or whatever algebra or whatever's used, right? Those still stay the same. And so we actually end up seeing how we verify whether a system works or whether it doesn't, and we use math to verify it. So math must be prior to um, physics. So it can't be reduced into physics. So math can't be a language of physics. So there must be universals, immaterial universals, which are prior to it.
Okay, so math can't be reduced to physics.
Yeah.
You're saying that can't happen because physical objects. Well, you're just blowing my mind, dude. Sorry, I'm just
That's
trying
fine.
to catch it. So how does here? I'm trying to let me just go back to my notes because you talked about this in the conversation beforehand,
Yeah.
and I wrote some things about this. So math is immaterial in a vacuous way. That's something I wrote.
It's good to know.
If math is, then that was before the yeah. I'm sorry. Just give it to me again, man. Just give it to me
Sure,
again.
sure, sure. Yeah. Okay. So, if math is a language of physics, so everything has to reduce to the material. Material must ground everything for you. Like if you have an image of a
Okay,
unicorn or
so
something.
okay. This is where my mind's breaking right there. You're saying physics, right? And I'm thinking like physics, the subject. You know,
Sure.
physics like math, physics, chemistry,
Yeah.
these subject matters that we study. The
Yeah.
the subject. But you're talking about the physical processes, aren't you?
Well, I'm equating them for you right now because you equate them. You think you're saying physicalism and materialism are the same, so I'm just equating them as it is right now. That doesn't really. It's
Well,
fine.
okay. I think I see where you're going there.
Yeah, I'm not
So
talking about the subjects.
you're not talking about the subject. So math is a language of the physical processes of the universe.
That's what I
Okay.
would say. I'm not. I don't ground everything in math, obviously, but I don't ground everything in physics either because I think physics is way more shallow. So, and a way we could test it to see is whether math is prior to it or after it is to see which one changes when you put it prior or after. And we could see that math verify when you change to quantum mechanics, math doesn't change. When you change to classical mechanics, math doesn't change. So in that sense, we can't really see that physics is mediating or changing
Okay.
math.
Hold on. So when you say math doesn't change, you mean that you just mean like 1 + 1 = 2 still, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. You don't mean like we don't, because we do use different maths. Like calculus was invented just to deal with these super small, super big things.
That's true, yeah.
So we have invented whole other maths, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was in my notes that I had wrote down. Where is it? When you say dictate physics, there's multiple interpretations of that phrase, and you mean dictate physical reality. So we could alter the math. We could all agree that from now on, 2 is 10 and 10 is 2. So from now on, 1 plus 10 equals 3, and 2 times 2 equals 100. If we all agree, we could dictate that math without any minds. We could all dictate that math without minds. With minds, I should have said. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
But
Yeah.
that does nothing to the physical reality.
That's
That
true.
doesn't do
Yeah.
anything to the physical reality. We can use base 10 or base 9, base 2, etc. number systems. We,
Sure.
like I just said, invented calculus and all other stuff, right? So we must be very, very careful not to equivocate when we're talking about these things. So,
yeah.
with all that in mind, the math that is being altered when we're looking at the physical reality of the quantum system versus a macro system is just the language that we're applying at the moment.
Sure.
But you're saying that you would expect an entirely new set of mathematics for the quantum system?
Yeah, so I'm saying like I'm not talking about what we call it or something like that. That would be the social construct of it. I mean like what the mathematical processes themselves versus the physical processes themselves. If we theoretically put math after physics, then at best it could just be circular. Like that's the best it could be. You could just say like, oh, one apple is one apple because and whatever atoms it is because it's materially an apple. Because mathematics would be derivative of it, we would actually lose information of it because we can't account for quantities of like the apples or something like that. So you can only say an apple. There's an apple. You can't say how many atoms are inside it because you get rid of it if everything reduces to the physical or material object. But if we theoretically if we theoretically catch it like that and say, like, okay, maybe there's no or whatever, let's see what happens. And so it's like, okay, well, if physics mediates it, we have a deeper understanding of physics. What changed?
Your volume changed. I'm sorry, your volume changed. What happened?
I have no idea.
Something changed all of a sudden.
I
Now
feel like
you're coming back. You're coming back.
It is?
Come back. Come back. Come back. Come back. Where were you?
Is that good?
Nope.
Okay.
Not yet. Not yet.
I might have to leave and
It
come
sounds
back.
like you went inside a cup.
Yeah, I have to leave and come back. Okay, 1 second. Can I do that?
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
Come on back. All right. While he's fixing that, let me see what you guys are talking about. Ox, A plus B equals C unless a Y. Yeah, I need to sit up. This is too small. That's the problem with me. Unless a Y is added after this C. Then it's a J and can only be used in A, B, C addition and dividing. Right, exactly. Love it. Now I can't read everything else when I have it zoomed in. How crappy is that? Okay. Ox, the only math that matters has money in front of it. Right? If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right? Speaking of which, super chats are appreciated, ladies and gentlemen. Much appreciated. The mic clocked out. Yep, yes it did, Maya. And he's back.
I am, yeah. Sorry. It's better, right?
Yes, much better. Much better. Thank you.
Yeah. It does
Okay.
that sometimes. I have no idea why. But yeah, so if theoretically that physics accounts for math and we have a deeper understanding of physics, then we would expect a change in mathematics, but we're not seeing any change in calculus or anything like that. Nothing changes in topology or analysis or anything like that. It all stays the same.
But so why do you think that the physical reality is changing?
Well, and it's our understanding of it. And so if we have a deeper understanding, like in any field, if you have a deeper understanding of physics, you're obviously going to understand processes better. Like we got quantum mechanics and we can now understand black body radiation a lot better than classical mechanics can, which just comes up with an infinity, or it can't account for it or whatever, or just keeps getting hot or something like that instead of cooling down, which quantum mechanics can account for. So if we believe that physics, our deeper understanding of it can inform that, there's
Okay,
no
hold on.
Yeah.
I think I have a great way to say this, maybe. I don't think math is a description of physical reality. It is a
Okay.
description of quantities, the reality of quantities, which is a property of reality.
Yeah, but that could be
And
fine. Yeah, but
that's a property of reality at any and all scales, which is why it's constantly applicable.
as being a property of it, we have an understanding of an apple in atoms, and math doesn't change for that, even though the quantities change. So we're not having a deeper understanding of math or something like that. I do feel like math does change, and we do develop it, but we use it on based on something more fundamental.
Well, I mean, I think it changes based on our understanding of quantities and their relationships to each other.
Sure, that's fine. I don't have a good definition of math, to be honest. I think quantities does enough, so it's good, but I feel like it's got to be something a little more fundamental. I don't
Yeah,
know what it is.
because quantities is like, an emergent property. I'm going to say that word so much, right? I'm going to start doing shots every time I say that.
Sure.
It's like an emergent property of reality, quantities, right? So, like,
Yeah.
we do math to understand those things. But
Yeah.
when we go down to the quantum scale, we're not going to a new realm of reality. It's the same reality. It's just
Yeah,
smaller.
yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I do agree. But the fact that we have to equate reality with math rather than reality with physics is really what undergirds the point that math would be more fundamental to physics and that everything can't reduce to it, to physics or
Well,
material things.
yeah, I don't know. See, I don't say why you're saying that. Why are you saying that reality is math?
Well, I'm not saying that. I don't think that whatsoever. I think reality is God's being fundamentally, and then eventually you get to because everything fundamentally has being towards it. If you say something is something, or if you say a cat is running or something like that, one you have to use is, which is being, and two, the reference is of a cat. It is a cat, and it is running or whatever. So in everything ascribes towards fundamentally towards being or existence. So I think being is more fundamental, like quantities. It's quantities of what? Of something existing. So everything fundamentally breaks down into being. It's very Neoplatonic.
Yeah, quantities is the abstraction of reality, right? We've abstracted that we have in reality things that we can quantify, and so we
Yeah,
can just abstract the quantity concept and deal with that by itself without actually dealing with the physical reality. And in that way, math is vacuously immaterial.
sure, but you're saying it's fundamentally a property of material things, right?
I'm
Is that
saying
what you
that
think?
what is fundamentally a property of material things is I don't even know what did I say?
The
What's the fundamental
quantities.
property of material?
Yeah.
Quantities. Things can be in quantities. Yes, yes, exactly.
Sure. I guess I'd throw another one that's kind of interesting out there. Um, if it's a material thing, what material thing accounts for it? Now you're saying it's a property of it, but a property of what? If you say it's an apple, then do I have to have an apple in order to do math every single time? And Frege brought this up. He said if you have a unit, or I think he said a deck of cards, but on the SCP it says a unit. So you have a unit, an army or whatever, and it breaks down into units, companies, platoons, or whatever. You still have one thing there, and the only way to account for the quantity of it isn't by the material thing itself. So if I have 52 a deck of cards, how do you split that up into 52 cards, four suits, 13, 4 piles of 13 or whatever, however you, or even the atoms of it, or one deck of cards. Uh, if you try to do that, you can't use the material thing to account for that. So it can't account for math because no material
Yeah, I
thing
get it.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because quantities is a concept, and a concept is an immaterial thing. So math is the study of a immaterial thing, concepts, the
sure.
concept of quantities.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah.
vacuously immaterial. The material is still there. Is there still the material of the neuro? Here, I wrote this in my notes here. we can consider figures irrespective of physical quantities. So math does not have to represent physical reality. However, it cannot be done with chemical interactions, i.e., calculators, doing physical calculations. It does not exist without at least one of these calculators. The physical reality supervenes on and is fundamental to the immaterial reality. The physical reality is the basis for all non-physical phenomena like concepts, ideas, abstractions, fictions, governments, etc. All these things have a dependent existence, and that dependency is on physical phenomena like neurons and serotonin molecules, though whose existence is independent. Those things persist without underlying sustaining things to perpetuate them.
I feel like that really cuts to the matter of it. You can't necessarily you can't do math with physical objects necessarily, but you can do math outside of that. So that means you don't need a material thing and that it's more universal than it, but you do need math in order to do physics. So that shows an asymmetric relationship where one goes towards the other, rather than a symmetric where A R B, which would be physics R relationship math, and then B R A. That would make it symmetric, but instead it's A R B and it's not B R A. So there's a one-way relationship for their mathematics to physics. So
I'm gonna write this down. Okay, say that again. Start over. A R B.
Yeah, lowercase a, capital R, lowercase b, and then that means objects A and B, they're in a relationship. R just means a general relationship. It doesn't define any specific one. So it could be like and or whatever it is, you know. And then you do BRA, and if both of those hold validly, then that's a symmetric relationship. But for us, with how mathematics is, you need mathematics to do physics, but you don't need physics to do mathematics. That becomes asymmetric relationship, which is A.
Slow down. Break this down for me. What is A?
Well, it's just a general object. It's just like a variable, and then R is.
Yeah. I want to break this down super slow. I'm gonna write this down.
Okay. Then yeah. Let me just jump to the. Sorry. A would in this case be mathematics, and then B in this case would be physics.
And by physics, we mean physical processes.
Sure. Yeah. Or it could be the subject. Either one's fine at this point, to be honest.
Okay. And C is what?
There's no C. It's just ARB and then BRA.
I mean, A was R.
Well, it's just a general relationship narrative. It could be like the logical connective and, or it could be the logical connective or, if and only if. It doesn't, or the implication arrow. It doesn't matter which one it is. It's just a general one.
So it's not and or. It's both.
It's none of them. It's just capital R. Yeah, it's just capital R. Because it's any relationship. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's actually you can go to the wiki and for symmetric relations, and then you can see it'll say like ARB and then BRA, and that's a symmetric relationship. And then if you go to asymmetric relationships, it's ARB and not BRA.
So we're saying that math and physical processes have a symmetrical relationship.
An asymmetrical relationship. That's the argument.
Asymmetrical.
Yeah, that means it's only one. The relationship only goes one way. It's only symmetric it's half symmetric, I suppose.
And it's the physical processes to the math, right?
Well, it'd be mathematical processes to. Well, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Or am I saying my way and you're saying your way?
No, yeah, that's sure. That's fine. Yeah, I said it wrong the second time.
Okay. Asymmetrical relationship. Well, I mean, I really don't know how to explain it any differently than how I have. What part of what I've said do you not agree with?
The fact that if we don't need if we don't need physics to do mathematics, or if there's not necessarily physical processes in order for mathematical processes to work, then but you do need mathematical processes for physical processes to work, or the subject, it doesn't really matter, then it becomes an asymmetrical relationship. And if it's an asymmetrical relationship, then it can't reduce down into the physics. It has to be prior to the physics.
So I think we're equivocating the mathematical language with the actual mathematical relationships.
In this case, it's not an issue for me. We're not talking about ontology, we're just talking about the relations, and both relations hold.
How so? Like tell me how that works.
Sure. So if you like the mass formula for physics, if you have the mass formula for physics, what it does is it imports, in order to have material mass to do physics, it imports what's it called? Area from geometry. I think it's a really terrible formula, to be perfectly honest, but it does show it does show that you do need area from geometry in order to do physics. So, or to have mass. But yeah, so I mean, if if a mass point, if you have mass point, I don't even remember how to do it anymore. But if you have like a mass point 3 of some object and then a mass point 5 of another object, if I remember correctly, it's just the length is 8 or whatever. I don't remember. It's been so freaking long, to be perfectly honest. But so that math doesn't.
Okay, hold on. So let's do it like this, right? I've got these two silicone rings here, right?
Sure.
1 + 1 = 2 in physical
Yeah.
form, right?
Sure. Let me try and anticipate.
Where's the math here? Where's the math here?
Let me. Well, clearly math's accounting for that, but let me go a little bit further. Would you say there is 0 gods out there?
Would I
You would
say
say there are 0 gods.
would I say there are 0 gods?
Yes.
As a matter of fact,
It doesn't matter. Just to humor me, I suppose here.
I would not say it as a matter of fact, but I would say it colloquially.
Okay, sure. So you could say there are 0 gods. What physical thing accounts for that if there are 0 gods? Nothing. So mathematics can account for things that aren't necessarily
I wouldn't
physical.
use mathematics unless I'm speaking matter of factly.
Okay, well,
So I
I
wouldn't
assume
say that.
somebody else would.
So I would not say there are 0 gods. Let's go with that then.
What would you say there are 0 of? Oh,
I would
you know
not.
what? I'll do this. I think this is kind of fun. Okay, so the largest number that anybody could think of, like 70 undecillion or whatever, one. What physical object accounts for that? None. There's got to be nothing that accounts. I don't even think there's that many particles or what. I have no idea how much there would be. But in any case, there's no material object which accounts for it. So you can do math outside of physical objects. So math doesn't necessarily reduce into physical objects.
Maybe photons.
It may be. That's true. I mean, but you could just go further.
I don't
I
know.
mean, maybe. I have no idea. But you can go further.
I'm a skeptic. I don't make claims of absolute knowledge.
You know what? I've actually got a pretty funny point against that. I did actually talk with you about it, but I was curious what you thought about it. We don't have access to non-knowledge. We only have access to knowledge. We can only
let's talk
know
about
what.
that crap.
Yeah, we can only know what we know. So I'm kind of curious how you can be a skeptic when you can't epistemically actually be skeptical, because we can only know what we know.
Okay, what is non-knowledge?
Well, I mean, that would be something that a skeptic claims they have, but I suppose it would be the social construct from my metaphysics. It would be the social construct of an epistemic view that is not that doesn't use knowledge, or that just that, I suppose. We can only know what we know.
So you only know what you know.
Every
So
human.
something that you think but you don't know. Like if I asked you what's your best friend doing right this very second, you could tell me something that you think he's doing, but you wouldn't know it, right?
Yeah. I suppose that's good. Yeah, that's a good point. If I say that I don't know or something like that, I would have to have absolute knowledge that of what not knowing would be, and I don't think we have access to that of what the not knowledge because it would be the inverse of everything that he is doing or that we would know or something like that. But we don't have access to everything, like because there's lots of things in the universe nobody just colloquially we just don't know or whatever. We only have access to what we know. So when somebody
Right.
says they don't, so when somebody
You
says
only
they
have
don't,
access to what you know.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go
So
ahead.
yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. So agnostically, when people are like, "Oh, I'm agnostic about God" or something like that, that's like, well, actually, you do have some conception of God. You can't say you're without knowledge. And even if you want to say you have 1% knowledge or something like that, which I think is kind of goofy, we don't make a decision based off of 1% knowledge. We make a decision based off what we know in that moment. It's going to be a yes or what for whatever we believe it's going to be. But in any case, if somebody says like they don't have knowledge of God, it's like one, you reference God, so who the hell's that you don't have knowledge of, and two, you have like a few concepts of what you believe is the fact about what God is. Maybe you believe He is a social construct. Maybe you believe whatever you believe about Him, and you've got justifications for it. We don't actually have access to non-knowledge. So I feel like the agnostic position and even the skeptic position isn't an accurate one people can actually hold to.
Well, I mean, I think that what you're making is a kind of a I don't mean to be I don't mean this in a what's the word? I don't mean to be pejorative when I say this, but
Sure,
I
sure.
think you're making a semantic argument.
If you want it to, sure, but I mean, semantics is in a Freudian semantics. What it means is like if you say orange and naranja, uh, you say other words or something like that, they all have the same reference. So different senses is what he calls it. So if an orange in English, a naranja in Spanish, those are all different senses of the same reference. So that would be semantics. But what you're saying, but what that would be is saying, oh, there's non-knowledge or whatever of God or something like that. I'm saying, no, you do have knowledge, but it's of something else. So that wouldn't necessarily be semantics, at least in the Freudian sense. There are different concepts of
So
semantics.
let me clarify. Like, so what I'm saying is that you're kind of saying that I have knowledge of a being that is described as God,
Sure.
and I have beliefs about that being.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that being has some kind of existence in my brain,
Sure.
and I can't deny that fact.
Yeah. Whether you think he's a social construct or whatever.
Right. So I can call it semantically whatever I'd like, but that being has an existence in my brain that I have knowledge of.
Sure.
Right? I think
Yeah,
that's
that's a
where
good.
I'm getting from you.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm perfectly fine to step into your way of thinking about this and use
Sure.
your semantics and argue with you like that. A lot of people can't do that. A lot of people, most people are, I think, I wouldn't say most, I shouldn't use most because semantics are important. I totally agree with you. But I think a lot of people are incapable of changing their paradigms tacitly in order to engage with other people and see where they're coming from. So I'm going to try to do that with you.
Sure.
So, okay, God exists in my brain as a social construct, as what else would you say
Well, I
for
suppose
people
it,
who
it
are quote
depends.
unquote colloquial atheists?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe you think he's he's a cynical person or something like that, or you have some conception of God, and that's who you're referring
A
to.
villain, a villain.
A
That's something
villain,
that
sure.
some villains, some atheists might call him. Uh, so yeah, there are there are labels that you could attach to this character, but the question of whether or not this being has the ability to affect the physical reality that I live in, that I matter. Like, see, even that can get a little stuffy, right? Because concepts, even if there's no real thing behind them, do have a certain level of power. The idea
Sure.
of God affects the real world every single day. People
Sure.
spend I did the calculation, I posted it on Facebook at one time. They spend mind-blowing amounts of time praying every single day, time that
Yeah.
could be spent doing so much more productive things, in my opinion. But that's a
Sure.
whole other conversation. But that
Sure.
affects the real world. So the concept of God is moving back and forth through our universe in a way that is appreciable. So I
Sure.
see what you mean in that sense, but I don't know if you can meet me that way and see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, I would say that he's exists as a social construct. So I wouldn't say that he doesn't exist. I don't feel like anybody can ascribe non-existence to anything because we don't have access to non-existence. We don't have like the Mario, a negative world or whatever, or Link negative world. We can't access a negative existence. We can only access existence. So the point is really trying to figure out what is the existence they're talking about and what is the existence you're talking about and how do they differ. And so if again, he exists in some format. Does he exist fundamentally as the creator of all reality, or does he exist fundamentally as a social construct, which is above a family joke or something like that? That's a small social construct, but like a huge social construct which affects people socially or something. Or does he exist materially? Some people think that God should or does exist materially, and we should be able to account for that. Can we see him or something like that? And so it's really a matter of like pointing out where exactly he is. But I think that really puts where the aspects are, because if God is material, then we can use empiricism to understand him. If math is material, we can use empiricism, our senses, to understand him. Um, but but if they're not, then it depends on the epistemology you use. But if you do think that he's a social construct, which is like testimony, the testimonial epistemology, you just hear it word of mouth. If you do believe that, then there has to be a justification for that. And so at that point, there's not really a skeptical position, but there is a position where both sides be like, well, this is the epistemology I'm going to use for that, and if we can find them, then we can. If we can't, then that.
And you're basing this off of the Plato definition of knowledge, right?
I'm very much against the Plato definition of knowledge,
You're
but
against it.
yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm very much a
Oh,
Platonist, but that's where I'm against. Yeah,
oh,
I
you
don't
you
think.
are a Platonist.
Yeah, I'm a Neoplatonist, but yeah, I do like Plato.
So you are a Neoplatonist, but you're against the Plato's definition of knowledge.
Yeah,
Oh,
I,
okay.
I don't think.
So, what is your definition of knowledge? Because I am totally lost now.
Yeah, sure. So objects dictate what the knowledge is. So if you try to like what a bird can see, the ontology of their eyes, what their eyes are, the basis of their eye as their eye, versus my eye. Um, if they're using my eyes, they're not going to be able to see a worm like 5 miles away or whatever on the ground. So it's what allows us to have knowledge of something depends on what the ontology is. So ontology determines or mediates the epistemology that is used. So for me, it's not justified true belief or something like that. I don't. I think that's a bit whimsical, to be honest. But
Okay, I think that your definition of knowledge itself is an epistemological position.
well, that's sort of a metaphysical definition of it. But yeah, it's definitely of the epistemology.
Is it? You're saying that the ontology of the thing
Yeah,
dictates what the thing can know.
yeah,
That
exactly.
sounds to me like an epistemological assessment of all things. It's saying that everything is epistemologically limited
Yeah,
by its ontology,
yeah,
which I don't think I disagree with
sure,
necessarily. I mean,
sure.
I'm ontologically limited to a certain extent, but I mean, I do have the ability to develop technology that will increase my perception. So I
Yeah,
mean, what are my true limits is yet to be known. I don't know what a human being's true limits, and therefore any other creature that could possibly communicate with us would have the same limits as us.
sure. Yeah, no,
I
I
don't know.
agree. Yeah, I would say,
Uh,
yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool. I'd like to be AI at some point, but yeah, I do account for the. I think metaphysics accounts for ontology and epistemology. So I just try and say it's my metaphysical account, where a materialist would have a different metaphysical account. Maybe I have no idea what justification for epistemology would be from another viewpoint. To be honest, idealist or materialist or anything like that. But that's how I
So
view it. Most people just use justified true belief. So, but I don't agree with it.
what's wrong with justified true belief?
Well, on their properties, if you meet two, like if like a dog has a tail, and okay, well then a dog is a tailed being, or like a man is a featherless biped, and then Diogenes holds up the chicken. Look, it's a man because it's a featherless. With it when it's plucked out of its feathers, it's like, look, it's a man. The properties themselves are never going to be able to get to the essence of the object. So saying like knowledge is justified true belief, you're just throwing three different properties out there, and it doesn't necessarily cover the essence. So I do feel like you can't, you have to go from the essence or the ontology in order to get the epistemology.
Oh, okay. I see where you're coming from there. Because the knowledge of definition is arbitrary based on what we have created with language. It's a
That could,
semantic argument.
that could be, yeah, that's fine. I mean, yeah, it can be very arbitrary, yeah, because it's just properties. What if another thing has properties? Then how do you distinguish the two?
uh, Ox, I use what do you call it? Nivea. Yeah. So there you go. Now you know. um, yeah. So, hmm. If we're going to, yeah, okay. So we call a chicken a chicken,
Sure.
and in Spanish is pollo, right?
Yeah.
There's no way to say. There's no reason to say it's correct to say it in Spanish or oh, okay. So me and Maya both use Nivea. Nice. We're doing a commercial. Somebody better pay us. That's all I'm gonna say. So what was I saying? So we call a chicken in America, or in English, I should say, and then in Spanish is pollo. And there's no reason or anybody to dictate or determine which one is correct.
Yeah.
There is no correct there. That's a nonsensical thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that. If you look at some of the first languages like Hittites and stuff like that, a lot of the animals' sounds, what they would be called is based on the sounds they would make. And you find that with some that carries on to a bit. So they'd call it like a cuck-a-doodle-doo or cook-a-doodle-doo or whatever for like a chicken or whatever. And then they would how would you do it? So you can see that the objects mediate what the words are. So if like a pollo was like, is it called onomatopoeic or something? Is that what it's called when the word
I'm sorry.
sounds like it? What's it called when the word
An
sounds like
onomatopoeia?
the? It is it
I cannot
right?
remember what the definition of onomatopoeia is right now.
I think that I know I get it mixed up with the spelling it backwards thing, but I think it's a
I'm not
palindrome.
sure I
So
ever knew
anyway,
the definition of onomatopoeia, to be honest with you. I feel like I ignored that
that's
one on
the
purpose.
sound. It's Greek. Like you don't have to learn Greek and you automatically know it. But anyway, so the object mediates what the senses are. So the reference mediates what the senses are. But yeah, it does allow for the senses to do whatever they want them to be.
I'm sorry, that broke up so bad. I did not catch any of it.
Sure. The the reference or the object itself mediates what the sense is. So it mediates how people call it.
Okay. Here's
So
what I'm
that
going to ask you.
goes back.
So, what is something that is knowledge?
What do you? Well, I suppose I'd go back to the reference. What 5 miles away, what like a stag beetle or something is. What that looks like for me, it's not going to look like anything. So there's not going to be knowledge there. But what knowledge would be is whenever there's there's two objects. So you have the stag beetle and then you have the bird, and then that they can have a relationship with each other, just that you can see it for 5 miles. So the bird can have this epistemological knowledge of it based on what it is. Now, some like bugs or whatever, they can see like I don't know, like something like that. Different
No. I'm sorry.
So
It's
knowledge.
roboting up too hard. I can't understand. I'm sorry. I don't want
I
you to
know.
waste your breath saying it if I can't understand you. So I just want to cut it off there for a second. So hopefully he'll be right back in a second. Onomatopoeia definition from Maya Atkinson: the formation of a word from a sound associated with what is named. Okay, and here comes Shwah right back. Thank you,
Is
Maya.
it
I
better?
really appreciate that. Now I learned something. Yes, much better.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Oh, I
Yeah,
spoke too
so
soon. Maybe.
hello?
Just keep talking. We'll see. If it ain't me, it's somebody else, right? It's always something. Well, maybe Shwah will be right back in a moment. An onomatopoeia, the formation of a word from a sound associated with what is named.
Okay, yeah, then that's
Shwah,
the onomatopoeia.
is
Is
that
that
what
better?
your name is? Is your name an onomatopoeia?
Yeah. Oh, Shwah?
Yeah.
No, it's the linguistic letter. It's upside down and backwards. It's when the sound gets made. So if you say like I think dirt or whatever, I think that's the It happens for A, E, and I. It's just called a schwa.
Okay. So yeah, you sound crystal clear right now. If you want to continue with what you were saying before you got cut off.
So what knowledge is when objects that can have a relation with each other. So if the object can't have a relation with each other, which would be sights or whatever it is, sights, feeling, tactile, or whatever it can have with the other one, that is what the epistemology or knowledge that it can have. It to me it seems a little it's almost trivially true, but that to me there's a justification for starting from the object to go to it towards it rather than starting from weird properties called justified true belief.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the only things that you know are that which you have firsthand experience of.
Sure.
By your definition.
Sure. I mean that's fine. But I mean my justification is just that it's objects towards it and that's what it looks like. And when you break it down to that point, once it gets down to that point, it's like, yeah, it's kind of trivial. It's what you know. So what you know is what
Give
you
me an
can have.
example of that breakdown. How does that breakdown happen?
Well, you're starting from the objects, and so if I want to grab a jacket or someone grabbing the jacket, then I know it tactily and by sights and stuff what the jacket is. But you can know it rationally just as well. There's different ways that you can understand it. But whatever you can have a relationship, whatever the ontologies, the objects can have a general or relationship with, then you can. That would be what knowledge is. It's just that relation. So
Right. So
epistemology is just a relation.
So when you've broken down whatever object down to like the macroscopic scales,
Sure.
you're no longer having a firsthand experience. You're reading reports, you're seeing images, and all these other things. You disregard that stuff as knowledge.
No, testimony is perfectly fine. Yeah, testimony is how you have an object. So if somebody came up and said, "Oh, there's like a leprechaun or something coming around," and then that leprechaun comes around, or the leprechaun never comes around, but you keep hearing like, "Oh, a leprechaun's burning the houses down" or something like that. It's like, okay, well, I know what a leprechaun is, because it's the thing that burns houses down. But that's
You would
testimonial
say that you
epistemology.
know something that somebody else told you.
To some degree, yeah. To some degree, the testimony is used inside court cases too. It's just a very low form of evidence.
Well, I mean, we're talking about philosophical knowledge, right? So we're talking
Sure.
about absolute knowledge. We're
No,
talking
we're just
about,
talking. I don't believe
aren't
in
we?
absolute. I mean, I suppose if you're a dualist or something like that, or you had something like that, then sure. But I'm a monist, a predicational monist, so I do think there's degrees of knowledge, and I feel like that's for everything. Nobody knows fundamentally everything about it, but I'm not going to say like, oh, because you don't have absolute knowledge of, what physics will entail about quantum mechanics of a, 2-liter bottle of soda. That doesn't mean that I have no knowledge of it. So I just say that it's degrees
Well,
of knowledge.
if that's the case, then I really don't understand your critique of atheism, because I was under the impression that you were only talking about absolute knowledge. But now that that's in the and now that you've put back onto the table degrees of knowledge, now I really don't understand where you're coming from with your attack on atheism.
Yeah, no, my attack was on agnosticism, and that's for having non-knowledge. I do think it's kind of weird to say that you yourself have certain degrees of non-knowledge or certain degrees of knowledge. You have fundamentally knowledge that you
I don't know
necessarily
what
have.
non-knowledge is. That's your term. I have no idea. Like
That's
I'm trying
agnosticism.
to understand it, but I really still don't get it. Like, is it
That's,
just that I haven't heard of it yet, or that I
yeah,
don't believe in it? If I don't believe in something that I've heard of, I wouldn't call that non-knowledge.
my my
Like,
my
if I tell you a lie, is that non-knowledge?
No, agnosticism means non-knowledge. It's Greek. A means, it's the privative A that's even inside English for atheism. That's the privation of what it is, which means not or without or whatever. But it changes for verbs or whatever, or which means to undo. So if you like untie, or I don't remember exactly how it is, but um, yeah, so agnostic and then Gnostic means knowledge in Greek, as does episteme, which is epistemology, the study of knowledge. But in any case, when people say they're agnostic about God or something like that, they're saying they have non-knowledge about God. And so that's the issue with it. And then skepticism also tries to play this role where it's skeptic, which means it doesn't have knowledge of it. The distinction between what I was saying with like you have knowledge, fundamental knowledge, and all that kind of stuff, versus the you have 1% knowledge of God. You can't have 1% knowledge of the thing that you're saying. You have full knowledge yourself
Okay,
because
you got to slow
yourself.
down. You got to slow down. Hold on. Go back one step.
Sure.
Non-knowledge. You said that it's because it originally the Greek term of agnostic was originally non-knowledge.
Yeah.
That should mean something today.
Well, I mean, that's just what the term is. That's where the term is borrowed from. So when they say they have non-knowledge of something, they're agnostic about a position. That's an epistemic position of non-knowledge, or of, it's a knowledge
Okay,
position of non-knowledge.
we take terms from the Latin and the Greek and incorporate them into modern English, and they lose some degree of their original meaning all the time because of the
Sure.
translation and the colloquialisms, and it's just the nature of language. It's fluid. It's always
Sure.
changing. We can't.
Sure.
That's a genetic fallacy to try to hold it to that.
Oh, I mean, that's perfectly fine. But if you look at any of the uses of agnostic, like there's a popular meme that's from like a decade ago, maybe, and it has the Gnostic, agnostic, theism or atheism, it has like a quadrants or whatever. But anyways, what people try and use it as is saying like they lack belief or they have non-belief or something like that for agnostic. But if you use the Plato justify true belief, in any case, it's part of the epistemic process. So you could just put them all in. You can conflate them all. It's no real reason to not to. There's no.
It's difficult because when you say non-knowledge, it sounds like you're describing a literal thing as
I
opposed to the
know.
antithesis of a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm using it the way I completely disagree with the concept of non-knowledge or a position of it, but people do, agnostics particularly, and skeptics do try to go in there with the fact that they don't know and they're just doing this as if knowledge comes from them, and that's an issue because it creates this a lot of contradictions where like you can have 1% knowledge of God or no knowledge of God, who you're referencing, who you're saying all that kind of stuff. So there becomes issues when you start from the individual. So for me, when I say that you have a degree of knowledge, it's not coming from you. It's coming from the ontology, the objects that you have with another thing. So the degree that of what God is, you're at 100%. There's only one thing that you yourself, like you're not even a part of this, to be honest. There's no you deciding whether you've got 20% knowledge of God or anything like that. Your concept of God is determined and mediated by what your reasoning is, or your reasoning skills, or whatever epistemology that you're using, and the subject or the object that mediates the subject. So,
Okay.
and then, but that's in degree to pure knowledge.
Okay. So last time we talked, I did the Superman example.
Sure.
Have you ever seen the movie Zero Theorem? The Zero Theorem?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, in that movie, there's this fictional church called the Church of Batman the Redeemer. So I'm going to do a little retcon and switch it to Superman the Redeemer to
Sure.
bring it into line with my last. So there's a church in a hypothetical world that worships Superman. The fictional character Superman, not an actual Superman. You have read a Superman comic book, I presume. You've seen a Superman movie at some point. You know about Okay. So there are people here in this world telling you Superman is real. He's going to come back and save us one day.
Sure.
And you know about Superman. Do you have knowledge of a real Superman?
I have knowledge of I can only know what I know. So the knowledge that I know of what Superman is, it's what he is. It's the relationship that I have with him, which is him as a comic book, as a reader, I suppose, or movie watcher, of him as a fictional character, and the type of fictional character that he is, which is, fictional DC or whatever.
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the main crux. Would you call yourself an agnostic to that Superman? Or if not, then what?
Well, I can only know what I know, so I can only know him as whatever. So if somebody came over and testimonially said, "Oh, well, the Superman, that person you read in the comics, he's actually real and he's coming back or whatever," it's the same. You can see this play out inside a court system. It's like, okay, but we might need material evidence, or we might need reasonable evidence. We might need some fundamental evidence to mediate that, because while I do think that you do believe that, there's whatever charitable, unless, being charitable, whatever it is, I can understand your relationship with them. Maybe you're on drugs or something like that. Whatever that person is, they're on drugs or hallucinating, whatever the case is. And they do believe that. And it's like, okay, sure, I do believe that, but I have to use a more fundamental concept of knowledge in order to mediate that. Do you know what I mean? So
I'm not sure I heard the answer to my question. I was listening for the answer to my question. Are you an agnostic to Superman in that scenario?
No, I accept that what I do know now is his relationship to Superman, or to some degree, and then I have still know my relationship to him. In the same sense that if they came out with a Superman comic and it was like, oh, well, it turns out Superman's actually the bad character, and then they came out with the next one, they're like, oh, actually he was being controlled or whatever. It doesn't just because the stories change to some degree, I forgot what my point was going to be. That's a good point. But yeah, it's just because the story, I still have to mediate who Superman is. So if I'm like, I may be able to be like, okay, yeah, Superman was probably being controlled before they came out with that issue. And they come out and I'm like, see, that's exactly what was going to happen. So it depends. So I can only know what I know. There's no way, just because somebody adds in some extra detail or something like that, that doesn't necessarily have to change fundamentally what I know. And I definitely don't put it off to the side and be like, well, I'm agnostic about this, agnostic about this. In a large sense, accounting for things by what they're not, it's a fool's errand, I would say, because it's infinite and we don't have infinite time. You could call
nobody
a
does that.
rock. Exactly, yeah. You could call a rock a vegan or atheist or something like that, but you're gonna have to keep going, because it's everything except that rock is what that rock would be. There becomes a property issue if you accept properties.
No, the only reason why I take on the label of atheist is because I was forced into a world with a bunch of people who believe in God.
Sure.
I didn't choose this. I had
Sure,
no say in this matter. I did not tell you guys to believe in God. I didn't tell you that there was a God. I had
sure.
nothing to do with any of this. I was just born here. You guys believe this crap, and I'm just like, I don't. So what do I call myself? I heard
That's fair.
atheist. Like it. That's what I am. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's
Uh,
fine. That's fine. Yeah,
but so you're telling me you wouldn't call yourself an agnostic to this Church of Superman? Uh, and all the things that you know about Superman, the character,
sure.
in the face of a zealot for Superman,
Yeah,
he's going to be telling you, you know about Superman. You already know. You have knowledge. So
yeah,
I don't understand why you don't just come over here and start giving us money for our church.
sure.
And
Well, I'm
I
definitely
don't
not
understand.
saying that to
I'm
you,
just
by
trying
the
to
way.
figure out what you would say.
Yeah, I would say it's a social construct. I understand them as a social construct. But the same way you believe God is a social construct, you I don't consider people atheists. I get your point for it and I understand that. But I think it's more in the concept that maybe you're a naturalist or maybe you're this. You have a concept of how reality is. And when you came upon God at some point, you're like, that's not real, or that I can't account for that, or you're like, that's a social construct. In reality, we say like darkness is the absence of light, but darkness isn't an actual thing. So in that same sense, like you're like, that's a social construct, even though you said God doesn't exist. So in that same sense, I say that yeah, that's a social construct, and you've got a lot of work to do before I accept Superman is coming back or something to that effect. But I wouldn't say I'm agnostic about it. I just say this is what I know about Superman, and this is how we're going to have a conversation. I feel like it puts everything to the side or makes it tangential to be like, well, I don't accept him or I don't believe him. It's just like, well, I'm not here to have a conversation with no or whoever the hell that is. I don't have access to that. I'm trying to have a conversation with you, what you do know and why you have a justification for that. And here's my justification. Let's see which one can account for reality or whatever the topic is better, you know? And so that's how I would treat the Superman person.
Okay. So I see where you're coming from. I really do. I in a vacuous way, I agree with you. In a very vacuous
I'm very pleased about that, I suppose.
way. Yeah, God is a social construct, and he exists. All the gods exist as a social construct. Every
Sure.
single freaking one. In fact, every fictional character, every imaginary being that has ever been thought of exists as long as there is a mind to appreciate them.
Sure.
But that doesn't help us in any way. So
Well,
where do we go
it
from
kind
there?
well, no, it kind of does because at this point I can be like, well, I literally just read. You can. It's not just social construct. That's an umbrella term, right? But if you say like, why is a social construct? Like some people, I guess some atheists are like, oh well, there's all this bad stuff that happened and a good thing couldn't happen. That's a conversation people can talk about. I would be like, well, I literally just read them in a comic. And I'm not gonna. If people are writing comics, you're gonna have to justify how people write comics to herald in Superman or to herald in some real being that's going to come. You're going to have to write in a really hardcore justification for that. But that's a conversation starter. That's where people can have a conversation, on the topic. So those are two different kinds of social constructs or justifications for arguments for why they are that. But it's still a position that people are talking.
So, I mean, do you want to go to the ontological argument? Is that where? Because you brought that up before we started
Yeah,
talking,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess that's the next step.
Oh, yeah.
Or
I mean,
is
yeah,
that
yeah.
where you go, or do you not go there?
Oh, I mean, if somebody's interested, yeah, generally I do that. But yeah, everything is being,
But
and
is
then
that where your mind goes? Is that where your thinking and your logic go next? Now that you've
oh,
established God as you established God's vacuous existence as a
sure,
social construct in your
sure.
mind. So now you then take the further step with the ontological argument and then define God into a real existence in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, generally I do work into the ontological argument. Yeah,
That's what you're doing. Okay. See, I think I see why you're a theist. But
Yeah, I mean, like
uh,
I generally do try to use ontological adjacent concepts like the hermeneutics, how I read the Bible. Like, I do think there's a lot to it because it accounts for being, but you know, we're human, and I don't pretend that ontological argument is the final say on it. But I do think it's a hell of a lot better than the cosmological argument, which only accounts for actions.
okay. So a being than which no greater can be conceived
Yeah,
and which exists can be
that's
conceived.
Anselm. Yeah, that's Anselm.
That's not the one you like?
It's okay, but people ridicule it all the time. But nobody, I've never had a conversation where somebody went down where they're like,
Okay,
"This is
which one do you like?
ridiculous for this."
Which one do
So
you like?
I usually use Gödel's modal
Oh, yeah, that's right.
ontological.
You said that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. This is gonna be hard for me because I've never done this one before. So bear with me. How do you
Yeah,
spell Godel? Godd?
just Godel, and then modal ontological argument, and it might be in images. If it is, then they have on the side words that explain the logic. It uses modal logic. I'm against modal logic, but
And it doesn't bother you that all these arguments have to be made instead of just God, just being there.
not at all because math doesn't isn't there, but we still have to account for it.
Oh, math is totally there, dude. It's right there. 2 plus 2.
I see it.
It's right there. Okay. So modal ontological arguments for the existence of God. This is my first time interacting with this concept, especially in public. So forgive me for my ignorance and slowness.
It,
Um, Many people define God as a perfect being. Some philosophers argue that it follows from this definition that God. Okay, how could anything follow from a definition other than semantic entailments?
what? What do you mean?
I don't know how to say anything else any simpler.
Sure, sure, sure.
If
I can't.
if I make up a word, Mixus Pitalik, a Superman reference for anybody who's following. Mixus Pitalik, right? Made up word, and I say it means an empty lighter in the trash can. That's a definition, and it has entailments, things that you can logically deduce from that. Well, if a lighter is empty in the trash can, that means somebody threw it away. Blah 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 blah. Right? Um, just because something follows from the definition doesn't tell you anything about what's actually going on in the real world. That doesn't mean that anybody has ever created a lighter or that anybody's ever thrown one away or ever even used one. For all you know, lighters aren't even a thing. But because I've made up this word, Mixus Pitalik, now you have to, believe in lighters? Why?
Well, because you have to engage with it as a real thing, otherwise it's not a relationship. So if you say like what you said means a lighter, well then I mean you don't have to choose to engage with people, but if you're going to engage with it, you now know what that is. I mean, you can't just take it out of your mind. I mean, you may forget, but if you want to talk about it, you can't just start talking about nothing else. The only way you can engage with it is by engaging with it as a social construct or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's a real thing or something like that, or maybe you thought it was a material thing, like a leprechaun, like you really thought a leprechaun existed, but so you engaged with it as a leprechaun. You tried to look around for it rather than treating it as a social construct. But in some sense, the only way to engage with it is to engage with it tautologically.
I mean, in order to really, said you have to kind of try to imagine a world in which lighters aren't necessarily a thing.
Sure,
Not necessarily, right? I
sure.
could have just said gobbledygook instead of lighter for the
Yeah, yeah,
example.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't think that anything other than semantic entailments, or just the most basic. If you know that the objects in the definition are real, then you can draw some kind of logical conclusions. But without that, then the definition is just evidence of itself. A definition. A definition can
Sure.
only be evidence of a word.
Sure. I don't necessarily think that's true. If we define something like a a bachelor is an unmarried male, then that's all you need to know is what a male is or an unmarried person is, and you know what a bachelor is, and those are references to material objects.
What if we define bachelor as a married chicken?
Well, then you know then anytime you've seen a married chicken, whatever that would be, then you know what a bachelor is.
There are no bachelors.
Sure, maybe there's a church out there thinking that you can marry chickens to have union with God or something. To have
So,
chickens married so they can have union with God or whatever, or your household does because they did marry.
is there something other than God that you can define like this in use as an example?
What do you? Oh, I don't know what you're asking now.
Is there something other than God that we can use a modal ontological argument to
Oh,
illustrate its existence?
sure, yeah. Let me try it with this. It wouldn't be a modal ontological argument, but be an ontological one. Physics exists, and so Aristotelian physics talks about this thing called physics. How is it? Classical mechanics accounts more for physics than Aristotelian physics. There must be something which accounts for all of physics the best. This is the Anselm version. So there's a perfect physics which exists. And that's hardly disagreeable in some sense. There's obviously a subject which can account for physics to whatever degree uh, the best. And you can do that for math or literally anything, to be honest. So you just take some small thing and you account for the best thing of it. And how I account for everything, I use a metric for being and whatever's the most universal being. And so I do that for ethics just as well too.
The most universal being?
Yeah, which is God. Yeah. So
What does it mean
again,
to be a universal being?
well, the academic definition or traditional definition is that universal is across time and space, but we already have a different conception of time and space. Time is mediated by space. So in any case, universal just means that it's more broad. So if somebody commits a murder or something heinous or something like that, then they're trying to do something which is good, but it's a very particular good. And we call that murder, right? Because they just try to do that. But if it's you go perhaps like the Spartans or whatever, they would go over. There's not called murder. Theirs is called killing, and why? Because it's a social construct. It's the universality. It helps to a social construct level. And so we consider that to be more good or more legal or something like that than something which is very particular. So the more universal things are, the better they always get. And so in that same sense, that's how I measure physics or whatever is better. And so that's sort of the railroad, I suppose, for an ontological argument that I would make. And I think that every ontological argument makes. Plato, it's fundamentally from Plato. The concept is from Plato, the ontological argument, while the cosmological argument is fundamentally from Aristotle. So Plato used the world of forms. He said the form of good is the most universal. It informs all forms below it. And then, his cave in the shadow and all that kind of stuff. So it goes downwards. The most universal is the most good. So very Platonist.
Okay, so you said a lot there. And
Yeah.
I'm going to say that if you like what you said with the physics thing, right?
Sure.
If there's you have a gradation of things, you see that there's something that could be better, and so you assume that there must be a best, right?
Sure.
That's what you're saying, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's the Anselm argument, yeah.
But that's not the modal ontological. What's the difference?
Well, the modal ontological, it does the same thing, but the modal is as it uses different parts of different worlds. So it says if it's good in this one world and it's absolute, then it must be good in all worlds. So modal just means it's different worlds.
Huh.
So I don't accept the philosophy, but it's what a lot of philosophers use. So
it's kind of difficult to prove that when we don't have access to other worlds.
That's something I agree with.
Um,
I,
but
I tried to see.
regardless of the other worlds, um, let's say that there is, the most powerful being. Let's go with that. Most powerful being, right?
Sure.
What is stopping the most powerful being from being us, human beings?
Oh Lord. Trinitarians would argue that nothing, and that's why Christ is God.
Well, regardless of the arguments,
Oh, sure, sure,
of
sure.
the beings that we know for a fact, unequivocally, without any argument or dispute, of all the beings that we know true true facts that do exist,
Sure.
we know that human beings are that most powerful being right now. Now, there could be, of course, other beings that are more powerful,
Sure.
but all the evidence currently suggests that we are the pinnacle
Okay.
of power. So
Sure.
I'm just saying it could be us, it could not be. But why would we just assume that it must be something greater than us? Why can't we
Well,
even entertain the other half of that possibility?
okay, well, yeah, sure, I can use my argument that he's, if God, there's a fundamental thing, something's more fundamental than us, obviously, because we weren't here from the beginning. Something composes and makes us. Mathematics is just more universal than us. So let's say that God comes from his position of power, which is all the way universal, and he comes down to be human or something like that. Then you have no foundation for anything below, and everything collapses all the way up until it gets to where a foundation is, which would be God. You can't have math if there's no foundation. You can't have physics if there's no math to verify or account for it. And we humans simply aren't math. We're nowhere near capable or universal through time and spaces math. So
I
there's
don't
a reason.
understand that at all. I'm sorry. Wait, what? We can't have math without God?
No, I'm just saying that you need fund. You don't have to call them math, but you're saying like, why can't God just be human or something like that? And it's like, well, there would be a huge gap between if God was human or something like that. There would be a huge gap because there's obviously things that are bigger than us. So if
No,
the
no, no,
most
no. I'm
fundamental,
asking you to do an internal critique. Internal critique. Assume for a moment there is no God, that we are the pinnacle of all power in the
sure.
universe, in existence.
Do we
Then
control
what?
math? Do we control math?
No, no, no. We have no control over math. Math just is a brute fact of reality
Okay, then how can we be the pinnacle of reality?
because this is as good as it gets.
That's not going to help. I don't know. I'm not, how am I supposed to respond to that? You're saying that we're the
It
pinnacle
doesn't
and that
get
we're not the
it.
pinnacle.
We are the pinnacle, and the pinnacle is not that impressive.
I don't. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond to this.
We are the pinnacle, and the
Okay.
pinnacle is not impressive. You are
Okay,
not
but
impressed.
sure, but
Obviously, you are underwhelmed. I can tell, and you should be, because humanity is not impressive. But this is
sure.
the pinnacle of sentient power in existence in this hypothetical,
Yeah, but you said
and we
math's
have
a
no
brute
control.
fact.
Yeah, yeah. Math is just a brute fact of reality.
Then what
It
does
just is what
pinnacle
it is.
mean?
The height, the top.
But you just
This
said that
is
math
all I'm
is.
saying is that there are no beings that will ever be more powerful than us.
Oh, sure. I guess I'm not
There
really sure.
never were, and there never will be. We are the best, the most powerful beings that have ever existed in all of existence and reality.
Shoot. Yeah, yeah. No, it's how would you call it? I, I'll be
That is
perfectly honest. It
completely
doesn't make sense
consistent
to
with
me.
that. It's completely consistent with that argument, with that ontological argument. It doesn't violate that principle in any way. There can be a least, there can be a greatest, all that other crap. This is the greatest, but
Uh,
it's just unimpressive to you.
I think it's kind of. I think the best way I could say it is just like the judicial for the talion and turn the other cheek, and then you account for them both as judicial. Math as a being, it's an object. Physics is an object. It's clearly composed of objects. Material is object. So to say that humans are the most fundamental being, but still allowing math to be more
No, no, not
fundamental being.
fundamental. No, not fundamental. We're not fundamental. I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that we are the pinnacle of power.
Oh,
It's
power
a
is a social
hypothetical
construct.
to say that there is no.
Sure, sure, sure,
You're
sure.
operating inside your paradigm, and I'm asking you to do an internal critique of mine, and I don't know if you're capable of doing that.
I don't think I can. I don't really understand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't understand it.
Yeah,
It makes sense,
it's
but
like
I think like the social. I think power is more of like a social construct, which is why I really don't agree with might makes right, or anything silly like that. Because social construct can only take you so far. It doesn't change the math puzzle or anything like that if you're trying to solve a math problem.
mm,
So yeah,
well,
yeah,
to be fair to you, power is a very well, I mean, it's a complicated construct, and we'd have to define it and talk about. Okay,
sure,
I think that's enough for tonight. I think that we can move on to wrapping it up, and then we'll leave it for the next time. What do you think?
sure. That sounds cool.
Actually, mm, well,
You hyped it up too. I have no idea what you're asking.
where is it? I'm looking at my notes because there was one thing I wanted to talk about, and I feel it pulling me. And now I can't even. Now I have to find it because it's been too long.
Yeah.
um. Oh, okay, yeah. So what I really wanted to mention to you is the ad hominem that I made when we were talking about Plato, and I wanted to just mention that I noticed that when I was looking through our conversation, and I just so what happened was, for anybody listening, he said belief is generally under epistemology. No, I said sure. He said even if by Plato's definition of knowledge, and then I responded, and I'm so ashamed of this. Plato was relatively speaking a savage. Let's not take him too seriously. So that is an ad hominem. I was just sidestepping his argument and not even engaging. And if I had not have done that, I would have been able to make a better argument, which I was able to do later. Um, and I wanted to bring this up to you now. So you don't like the justified true belief definition of knowledge. We already talked about that. But I don't think I do like that definition of knowledge. And even with that definition of knowledge, I don't believe that human beings are capable of achieving any kind of absolute knowledge. I do believe that there are degrees of knowledge that we can obtain in matter of justification. But then, even with the justifications, we would never be able to know with absolute certainty if our justifications reflected the absolute true reality.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to bring that up to you. I should have done that in our conversation offline, but instead of doing that, I chose to ad hominem the guy you were talking about, like a petty little punk, and I apologize for that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I do agree with that distinction. I think like if you have like you have to have two conceptions of knowledge at that point. And so yeah, I try to mediate it into just one or conflate it into just one.
Okay. Um, I'm still kind of shaky on your definition of knowledge. Um, I understand that it's about, experience. It's about what you see and can. I understand that testimony is part of it too. I guess that's where I thought I understood your experience. I thought I understood your definition of knowledge until you threw that in there, and then that just basically blew it all up for me.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's as you said though. It is as you said that you have to have distinctions. Like if you have two, you have like your assertion of the object, and then what the object, your knowledge of the object as it is. So whether you 50%, whether a person 50% ascertains their belief in a rock or something like that, and then whatever to that degree is the actual knowledge of the rock. That adds an extra thing inside there. So I just try and get rid of the subject having an opinion on the rock. Instead, I just say it's mediated by the rock. You only have 100% knowledge of whatever percent that rock is, whatever you know that rock is.
Okay.
So that's how I do it.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll let you have that last word and go ahead and wrap it up now. So I do really appreciate it, Shwah. Do you want to say anything, any final, shout outs or anything before we
No,
go?
it's cool. It's cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, I do appreciate you joining me for this conversation. It's been a lively one and very engaging, and I feel like I've learned a lot, even in the preparation and lead up to it, and in the course of it. So, thank you so much for that. Thank you to everybody in the chat. Shout out to Maya. Shout out to Ox. Shout out to everybody else. Let me see who else is in there. Who's talking right now? Purple rhymes with orange. Shout out to you. Oh, he had to go, I guess. Well, thank you so much again, Shwah. We'll talk to you later. So Maya, Ox, Purple rhymes with orange, Native Atheist. Everybody else who's watching in the chat, thank you so much. Atheist Ant. Am I saying that right? Ant? Yeah, Atheist Ant. Good to see you too. Really appreciate you all joining me tonight. Shout out to all of you. Shout out to all the Patreon patrons. Shout out to all the members. Thank you all so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. So let's just oh man. Did I lose my notes? Yes, I did. What a loser. Well, I guess I will just say thank you all for joining me tonight. I really do appreciate all your support. And it's the bridges we build, not the bridges we burn, that give us the edge. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great night. And I'm getting out of here. Good night. Eventually. Can't figure out anything tonight. Oh. Y'all see that? I'm still watching? I didn't mean to show that tonight. I'll show it again next time. All right. Good night.